You may have read books, taken courses, sought answers through retreats, mantras, therapy, and still, something feels missing. There's a silent emptiness no knowledge can fill, a subtle absence as if a part of you were left behind, somewhere in time. And no matter how much you move forward, meditate, repeat affirmations, that echo remains. Not as a mistake, but as a calling that doesn't scream, that doesn't demand, but that persists, like an invisible presence behind everything. What most people don't realize is that this emptiness isn't a sign of spiritual failure. It's the trace of a deep forgetting, an existential lapse, where you stopped feeling who you are, to start becoming what the world expected of you. And in that gap, patterns emerged. Repetition, stagnation, disconnection disguised as productivity, anxiety dressed up as a spiritual quest. But the soul doesn't fight time. It whispers, in strange dreams, in coincidences that feel like messages, in the sense that something more is trying to surface. Do you feel it? As if there's an ancient memory, not in your mind, but in your skin. A wordless memory that vibrates, softly saying, "You forgot, but I'm still here." And maybe, just maybe, what's missing isn't another technique, but what you've been avoiding in the silence. Today we're going to walk through that silence. And on the other side, there's something you already know, you had only forgotten. The veil of illusion, why we forget who we are. There comes a subtle moment in life when, without noticing, we stop being and start performing. We perform roles, meet expectations, live out ideas of success, and wear images shaped by someone else's stories. Little by little, we stop living in the body as home and start living in thoughts, many of which aren't even ours. The child who once felt everything deeply, who gazed at the sky in awe and danced with no music, was slowly silenced by words, traumas, and looks that said, "That's not right. That's not normal. That's not who you're supposed to be." And so the forgetting began. But forgetting the soul isn't like forgetting a memory. It's a kind of existential amnesia, where the true self doesn't disappear, it just hides behind layers we stack for protection. The first of those layers is the ego, not the arrogant ego, but the one that believes it has to control everything in order to survive. This ego builds an identity based on past experiences, traumas, and emotional defenses. It doesn't seek truth, it seeks safety. And safety often means fitting in, repeating, obeying. This is the ego that shapes the social mask we wear. The mask of success, the spiritual one, the strong one, the one who has already healed. Masks that, if worn too long, stick to the face until we forget they're not our real skin. But the forgetting goes deeper. Our brain, that magnificent and mysterious instrument, operates through perception filters. One of the most important is the reticular activating system, or RRAS. It decides which stimuli from the world will reach our conscious mind, and it's guided by beliefs. In other words, if you believe you're not enough, the RAS begins filtering your reality to confirm it. You might receive praise, but you'll remember the criticism. You might succeed, but your focus will land on what's still missing. The world then starts to look like a distorted mirror. Not because it is, but because your mind filters it that way. Reality stops being what it is and becomes a repetition of what you believe it to be. That's the second veil, perceptual illusion. We don't see what is, we see what we expect to see. And here lies a nearly invisible conflict. You want to reconnect with who you are, but you're using the same mental filters that cause the disconnection. It's like trying to find a new path using the same old map. There's also the craving for control. The ego fears the unknown, and the soul is the unknown. Surrender, intuition, silence, all seem threatening to an internal system that spent a lifetime trying to predict, plan, and protect. So you meditate, but don't let go. You seek, but don't surrender. You get closer, but carry the armor of fear. The need to control blocks inner wisdom. It's like keeping a door locked from the inside, waiting for something divine to come in from the outside. It doesn't come, not because it isn't there, but because you've locked yourself away from your own essence to avoid feeling what once hurt. And the soul doesn't invade. It waits. It sits quietly, behind your thoughts, behind your automatic reactions, waiting for you to stop and listen. Many confuse that silence with emptiness. But there's a difference between the emptiness of disconnection and the silence of presence. The emptiness of disconnection feels cold, anxious, restless, like something's missing. The silence of presence feels dense, deep, welcoming, as if you've come home. But to reach that silence, you must pass through the veil. And crossing the veil is an unlearning, an undoing, a releasing of the effort to be someone in order to simply be. It's not easy, because part of us still clings to familiar pain. It prefers the familiar prison over unknown freedom. It fears what might happen if we stop fighting. That's the knot, the exact point where the soul's memory is kept. Not as information, but as presence. A presence that can only rise when we stop trying to appear right and begin to simply exist. The question is, are you willing to let go? Because this is not a mental process. It's vibrational. It's about opening, about humility, about presence. Maybe now you see it. The forgetting wasn't a mistake. It was protection. It was a necessary path so that when remembering, the truth would have depth. So that in finding yourself again, you wouldn't just recognize, you would honor who you truly are. And there is a technique, ancient, subtle, nearly forgotten, that points directly to that reunion. It's not learned through effort, it's accessed through surrender. That's what we'll explore next, because the soul doesn't need answers, it needs to be remembered. The forbidden technique, awakening the soul's memory. At some point in the history, the most transformative techniques stopped being taught out loud, not because they were dangerous, but because they required something the modern world can no longer offer: silence. The ancient civilizations knew. The Taoists spoke of Zhuang, sitting in forgetfulness, a practice where the practitioner doesn't strive to meditate, understand, or achieve anything. He simply sits and forgets. Forgets the name, forgets time, forgets identity. It's not mental forgetting, but a slipping of consciousness beyond the known self. It's the act of vanishing into yourself, so you can reappear in essence. Ramana Maharshi across the world taught something similar. He called it Atma Vichara, self-inquiry, but it wasn't rational investigation. It was a dive into a single question: who am I? And that question didn't ask for an answer. It asked for presence. Both practices, Zhuang and Atma Vichara, point to the same truth. Before remembering who you are, you must forget who you are not. Here lies a paradox few are willing to face. The forbidden technique doesn't add, it subtracts. It gives you nothing new. It dissolves what was never real. This forbidden label is symbolic. What was banned wasn't the technique. It was the state it demands: surrender. The mind doesn't want to surrender. It wants to understand, control, structure. But the soul's memory isn't activated through intellect. It's activated through presence, deep silence, effortless attention, self-inquiry with no answer. These are the paths that slip into the soul, but they only work when not used as a means to get somewhere. They're not ladders, they're mirrors. You don't walk toward the soul, you unravel until it appears. Maybe you've already felt this, in a fleeting moment, between breaths, in a sunset, or a song that brought tears without reason. In those moments, the veil breaks, not because you did anything, but because you stopped resisting. What we call here the forbidden technique is actually the most organic technology there is: presence. But not presence as a pretty concept, presence as a portal, as full surrender to now, without trying to change, judge, or understand. And as simple as it sounds, few can hold it, because silence reveals everything that's been hidden. And before finding the soul, you must face the ghosts. That's why many avoid this practice. That's why it feels forbidden. Because it doesn't give you what you want. It shows you what must be seen. But if you go through, if you stay with the non-doing, if you allow the self to dissolve without resistance, something rises from within. Not an image or idea or belief, but a vibration, something nameless, but recognized as home. This is the state where the soul's memory reveals itself, not in words, but in sensation. As if the whole body said, "This is it, I remember." And this doesn't require years of practice, it requires truth. 5 minutes of real presence can open portals decades of study never touch. But those 5 minutes aren't ordinary. They're intense, deep, empty of ego. You might try now and feel frustrated because the mind will try to step in. It'll ask for results. It'll watch the clock. Don't blame yourself. You just observe. The practice is in returning, always returning to the now, to not knowing, to the silence. And with time, something shifts. You begin to feel like you no longer need to understand everything. That control starts to lose its grip, that there's a wisdom that comes when you stop interfering. That wisdom is the soul returning, not as a speech, but as force, as subtle intuition, as quiet decision, as love without an object. And it doesn't come from outside. It rises from within. It was always there. You were just looking in the wrong place. So this technique cannot be taught. It can only be accessed. And you already have everything you need because it's not learning, it's returning. But there's something that can intensify this remembering deeply, the body. When seen as a temple, the body isn't an obstacle, it's a channel. The soul isn't trapped in it, but expresses through it. And there is a latent, forgotten, silent energy that, when awakened, flows through every part of you, activating centers of forgotten memory. This energy has a name, and that is what we'll speak of next. Because the soul may remember who it is, but it's through the body that this memory becomes life. The body is portal, Kundalini energy. While many search for the soul in the heights, in higher planes and abstract ideas, few realize it has always been trying to speak through the body. The body is not the enemy of the spirit. It is its most intimate reflection. Every tension, every recurring pain, every impulse that seems irrational, all of these are messages, not from the ego, but from the energy that sustains life. That's why ignoring the body is like ignoring half the path, and sometimes the entire path. The energy that lives within this body, that moves invisibly through the subtle centers, is the same energy that can awaken dormant memories, heal silent traumas, and open perception to levels never before experienced. This energy goes by many names, but in many spiritual traditions, it is called Kundalini. And no, it's not something you need to search for outside. It's already there, within you, asleep, coiled at the base of your spine, waiting not for effort, but for permission. Kundalini energy does not respond to forced techniques or mental exercises. It responds to listening, to care, to surrender. And when it begins to move, something changes, not in a dramatic way, but profoundly. You might feel inexplicable heat, vibrations through the body, goosebumps with no external cause, a sudden urge to cry without sadness, or a dense peace, so still it feels like it holds the entire universe. This energy flows through the subtle centers, the chakras, like a wave that clears out what's been stored. Fears, repressions, emotional memories, old patterns. Not to destroy, but to free what has been blocked. It's as if the body, touched by this force, remembers what it is. And in remembering, it begins to express all you silenced for years. Creativity returns. Pleasure becomes pure. Breathing deepens. Your gaze softens. Your touch gains intention. But here's a crucial point. The awakening of Kundalini is not always gentle, because as it rises, it meets resistance. And that resistance isn't in the body, it's in the mind. It's in fear. Fear of what might happen if you let go of control. Fear of feeling something long suppressed. Fear of losing the identity you worked so hard to build. That fear is understandable, but it is the main block that keeps this energy from flowing naturally. You don't need to force Kundalini, but you do need to stop suppressing it. And how does it show up in daily life? It may appear as spontaneous movements during meditation, as sensations in the body during a moment of surrender, or often through practices like yoga, free dance, conscious breathing, or deep states of presence. It's when the body begins to move from within, and in that inner movement, everything reorganizes. You don't need to understand how. The body knows, it always has, but it was silenced, trained to obey, tamed to function like a machine, not like a temple. Today, maybe, is the moment to return the body to its sacred place, to treat it not as the enemy of the soul, but as its greatest ally. Because when the body is heard, the soul sings. And when the soul sings, life dances. If this touched something in you, if you feel somehow that the body wants to speak, that something is stirring within, even subtly, then write in the comments, "I allow the flow." Just that. 3 words, but they signal something much greater. Your decision to leave survival mode and enter listening mode, to stop trying to control and start allowing, to tell your body, now you may speak. And if this message resonated, like this video, not as a mechanical gesture, but as an energetic confirmation that this message truly reached you. Because the more people allow this flow, the more the field expands. And what we're creating here is not content, it's a field. But before we move on, there's a deeper truth waiting to be faced. Because this energy can only flow freely when the parts of your soul that you've hidden are welcomed. There's a part of you that doesn't want light, that feeds off what you reject, that screams in the silence. This part isn't a mistake, it's a key, and it is with this part that we're going to speak now. The shadow as guide, integrating the unconscious. There are parts of you no one has ever seen, parts even you have learned to avoid, not because they're dangerous, but because they were once judged, hurt, ignored, and so they hid. These parts didn't disappear, they just withdrew to a place we call the shadow. The shadow is everything you were, felt, or wanted, but couldn't hold in the eyes of the world. It's not the opposite of light, it's forgotten light. Light compressed into pain, into rage, into chronic sadness. Light so long held back that it became dense, dark, silent, but it still pulses. You may notice it when you overreact to something small, when you harshly judge someone and later feel ashamed, when you feel guilty for wanting what you shouldn't, or when in silence you feel something inside still screaming, even if no one hears. That inner scream is the shadow asking for presence. It doesn't want to be fixed, it wants to be included. You are not broken, you are fragmented. And the shadow is the missing link to your wholeness. Carl Jung knew this when he wrote, "Enlightenment doesn't happen by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And this is where many get lost. They try to raise their vibration, reach higher states, expand awareness, but they do it while suppressing everything they consider too low. Sadness, jealousy, insecurity, doubt, impulses, fear. But spirituality that denies the shadow isn't spirituality. It's refined escape. The real journey isn't upward, it's inward. And inside, it's dark at first. But don't fear the darkness. It's the womb of transformation. It's where what was denied begins to reorganize, where what was rejected begins to come home. And how does that return happen? Not by force, but by recognition, by the silent act of listening to yourself, by sitting with your pain without trying to fix it. Imagine a child locked in a room for years, scared, abandoned, filled with shame. Now imagine you open the door, and instead of demanding explanations, you extend your hand. That is shadow integration. It's not about dramatizing, not about drowning in it. It's allowing the pain to speak so it can finally go quiet. This process can unfold in many ways. In honest writing that reveals truths you've never said aloud, in tears that come for no clear reason, in an old memory that surfaces during a solitary walk, or simply when you stop pretending that everything's fine. It's not about obsessively digging up the past. It's about acknowledging the fragments still living inside you, repeating patterns, attracting situations, sabotaging your freedom. Because the shadow isn't just what you feel, it's what prevents you from feeling. It's emotional numbness. It's the fear of being vulnerable. It's the sense that if you show your true self, you'll be rejected. Again. But now you're an adult. Now you have a choice. You can look inward with maturity and say, I will no longer exclude myself from myself. And when that happens, something shifts. The body softens. The breath deepens. The mind quiets. The integrated shadow doesn't disappear. It transforms into power, refined intuition, expanded presence, courage vibrating from the inside out. It stops being a dark place you avoid and becomes a well of wisdom that guides you. Many of your gifts are there, in your shadow, in what you repressed out of fear, but can now offer as service, as empathy, as authenticity, as purpose. But you have to descend, from the mind to the heart, from judgment to acceptance, from rigidity to inner touch. And if you've read this far, maybe you're ready. Maybe your soul is saying, enough of denial, enough of running. It's time to return. And in that return, you become whole, not because you've conquered your demons, but because you've learned to sit with them without losing yourself. This is the beginning of true liberation, not the one that promises escape, but the one that offers grounding. And when the shadow is integrated, something magical happens. You gain inner space, space for new possibilities, space to transform, even what once seemed impossible to change. That's when the spiritual meets the scientific, because what you begin to experience inside, the brain starts to mirror outside. The mind changes, connections rewire, your sense of self reshapes, and it's not a miracle. It's neuroplasticity. It's real, measurable, living transformation. And that is exactly what we're about to dive into now. The invisible bridge between consciousness and biology, between deep spirituality and applied science. The bridge between science and spirituality, neuroplasticity and transformation. For a long time, it was believed that science and spirituality belonged to opposite worlds. On one side, the rigor of data, on the other, the fluidity of the invisible. But this separation was just an illusion, created by a still fragmented mind. Because in truth, both speak of the same thing, just in different languages. Science offers structure, spirituality, meaning. And when the two meet, something powerful happens. Transformation stops being an ideal and becomes an observable process. This is where neuroplasticity comes in. For years, the brain was seen as a fixed organ, unchangeable after a certain age. But today we know the brain is plastic, it changes, it reorganizes, it learns, not just through information, but through emotion, experience, and presence. And this is where everything connects. Because every time you choose a new response to an old trigger, you're reconfiguring your system. Every time you breathe consciously where you once reacted automatically, you're forming new connections. Every time you embrace a repressed emotion instead of fighting it, you're literally rewriting the map of your being. Spirituality has always said you can transform. Neuroscience now shows us how it actually happens. But the process demands something most people avoid: inner consistency. It's not enough to want change. You must inhabit change. Because the brain doesn't respond only to desire. It responds to repetition, to coherence, to vibration held with intention. When you dive into practices of presence, self-observation, and silence, something starts to shift. at the microscopic level. The synapses that sustained your old patterns begin to weaken. The neural pathways that fed fear, guilt, and judgment begin to dissolve. And at the same time, new pathways emerge. Connections that were dormant begin to activate. Parts of the brain associated with creativity, empathy, intuition, and compassion start to grow stronger. This isn't mysticism, it's spiritual biology, and it confirms what ancient masters already knew. External reality shapes itself according to internal state. You see differently and begin to live differently. You feel differently and begin to attract differently. You move with more awareness and the world responds in resonance. But there's something even deeper. Neuroplasticity doesn't just allow for new choices, it frees you from the cycle of repetition. Because every self-sabotaging pattern, every emotional tendency, every fear that feels like part of me is actually just a well-worn path in the brain, a trail carved by experiences, reactions, beliefs, and one that, with time and intention, can be undone. This means you are not your pattern. You are the consciousness capable of choosing a new path. That awareness is liberating because, contrary to what many believe, you're not doomed to repeat, you're conditioned. And every condition can be reconditioned. But here's the delicate truth. The mind resists change, even when it's suffering with the old. It prefers familiar pain over liberating uncertainty. Not because it's self-destructive, but because it's been trained that way. And that training happened over years, maybe decades. That's why true transformation requires more than willpower. It asks for surrender, the courage to sit in the discomfort of the new, even when every part of you wants to return to the familiar. This crossing is not quick, it's deep. And every time you choose the new, even while trembling, even unsure, you're rewiring your brain to support the life you desire. Spirituality teaches that we co-create reality. Science now shows that creation starts in the nervous system, but there's something even subtler that unites both worlds: vibration. The frequency of your thoughts, emotions, and inner states, all of it directly impacts the way your brain organizes itself. And at the same time, it influences the field around you. When you sustain gratitude long enough, your body's chemistry changes. When you meditate deeply, certain brain regions linked to the ego quiet down. When you enter true presence, the body releases hormones of healing, calm, and expansion. In other words, what you feel shapes who you are, and who you are shapes what you experience. This is the bridge. It's not enough to study spirituality, you must live it in the body. And it's not enough to understand science, you must feel it in the soul. Because your brain is a mirror of what you've allowed yourself to feel, or what you've avoided. And here lies the beauty. Every time you choose presence, even for seconds, you are sculpting a new version of yourself, a version more aligned, more light, more you. And this doesn't depend on more information. It depends on practice. It's time to apply, to turn this awareness into experience, to bring theory down into the ground of your daily life, to integrate silence, observation, and conscious movement into your routine. Because transformation doesn't happen when you understand something. It happens when your body becomes the living proof of what your soul already knew. And now, we're going to do exactly that. We're going to make tangible what has so far been felt. We'll build, step by step, a path that leads you from remembering to embodiment, because what you seek is already ready to be lived. Applying the technique, a practical guide, the truth is already here, not as a concept, but as a dormant vibration, a silent force that waits, not to be chased, but to be allowed. Now that you've crossed the veil, faced the shadow, felt your body, and understood your brain, the question naturally arises, now what? What do I do with all this? But maybe the answer isn't in doing. Maybe the most revolutionary thing now is how you choose to be with what already is. This forbidden technique, forbidden not for its danger, but for being forgotten, isn't a sequence of steps. It's a vibrational choice, a daily decision, quiet, invisible, to place yourself in a state of listening. The practice begins where effort ends. When you wake up, before opening your eyes, feel your body's weight against the mattress. The mind will want to rush to your to-do list, but you choose to stay for a few more moments, to feel, to breathe, and to ask without needing an answer. Who is here now? Don't expect words. Wait for presence. That question, who am I now, is not meant to be answered. It's meant to be lived. Throughout the day you observe. Thoughts arise and you don't chase them. Emotions rise and you don't label them. Someone triggers you, you feel the impulse, but choose to stay in the body, in the center, at the point where breath meets your inner world. This is the practice, observing without losing yourself. Returning to the now, even when everything pulls you back to the automatic. It's simple, but it's not easy, because everything in you was trained to escape yourself, to react, to seek outside. But now, you're coming back. And this return has a body, it has ground, it has vibration. At some point, maybe during a meditation, or just in a simple moment, something begins to move inside, like a whisper, a warmth, a vibration with no name. Yet it feels like it knows you. You don't force it, you allow it. The body begins to become an instrument. Sometimes a spontaneous movement comes, a deeper breath, a muffled sound that wants to come out, a tear that falls with no story attached. Let it rise, let it pass, let it dissolve. You're activating something ancient, uncovering memories that don't come from the mind, but from your essence. This is the forbidden technique, to allow yourself to forget in order to remember, to unravel in order to rediscover, to fall silent in order to hear. And if at some point fear arises, if control wants to return, if the mind demands logic, that's okay. Welcome it, observe it, and return. Always return. There is no fall that can't be realigned through presence, no distraction that can't become a doorway. Even mistakes, when seen without judgment, become practice. You can, if you wish, create simple rituals. Sit in silence for 5 minutes at dawn. Write freely when intense emotions come. Close your eyes and breathe until you feel you've come back to your body. But remember, it's not about the ritual itself, it's about how you enter it. You can sit in silence for an hour and still be absent, or you can experience one pure moment of presence and touch the soul. Because the soul's time isn't chronological, it's vibrational. And every time you surrender fully, the field shifts, frequencies realign, inner doors reopen. This is the practice, not as a routine, but as a state. And over time, something begins to bloom from within. You begin to remember what was never spoken, to recognize inner landscapes that once felt lost, to sense that maybe your search was simply the path back to yourself, and then an ordinary day becomes a portal. The simplest gesture, a gaze, a touch, a pause, carries presence, and that presence heals. Not just you, but whoever it reaches, because those who are truly present become mirrors. And in that reflection, others begin to remember too. And this is how the forbidden technique fulfills its purpose, not as a hidden secret, but as a truth lived. It doesn't need to be taught, it needs to be embodied. There is nothing outside of you. There never was. The portal has always been within. And now, you know where it is. And perhaps right now, without warning, without ritual, something inside you is remembering, not in words, but in a piece that never used to fit. A piece without explanation, like the moment you stand before a mirror, look into your own eyes and simply know, I'm back. We've reached the end of our journey, but perhaps what ends here is only the beginning of something within you. You don't need to understand everything you felt, nor explain what was awakened, because some things can't be put into words, only into presence. If at any moment during this video you remembered something you didn't know you had forgotten, then the return has already begun. Remember, you are not trapped. You are just looking from the wrong place, and now you can choose to return to yourself. If you've made it this far, whole, present, true, write in the comments, "I'm back." That's how I'll know you crossed over, and that even in silence, we are walking together.